Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. We bring you interviews with professionals in the movement and exercise field. The goal is to provide information for other professionals and also amateur movement aficionados, people who understand that movement is part of what makes life complete. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise profession. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. We're going to give you a chance to learn from some of these talented and knowledgeable individuals, and we're going to learn along with you. Moving to Live podcasts are going to be short. Each interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single bout, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. We all like long-form interviews, but time is valuable. Moving to Live wants to give you the option to learn and be entertained without needing to commit 60 minutes at a time for an interview. Give Moving to Live a listen. Check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, which highlights people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority. Moving to Live would love to hear from you. Want to connect with us or have an idea for somebody you think we ought to interview? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com, or connect with us on Instagram and Twitter, both _mov2liv. We're excited to bring you these interviews, and we think you'll enjoy each and every one that we bring you. Welcome back to another edition of the Moving to Live podcast. As you heard in the intro, we are a podcast where we try to break down knowledge silos. Our ethos, along with our sister podcast, FitLab Pittsburgh, is to spread the word that movement should be treated as a lifestyle, not just an activity. Some of our best guests often come from recommendations or introductions from other guests. And a big thank you to Fred Go of PT Helper, who connected me with today's guest. Fred was the sponsor or co-sponsor with PT Helper of a virtual clinic that was held with company called Urban Polling. And when I saw Urban Polling, I'm like, I'm not exactly sure what that is. I looked it up, I found out, and I was fortunate enough that the founder of the company, Mandy Shintani, who is a gerontologist and an occupational therapist, was willing to speak to me. So Mandy, thanks for taking time to talk to Moving to Live.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Ben. And I agree. Sometimes the name is a bit misleading in terms of what it represents.
I know my first question I always like to start out with Moving to Live is, what's your elevator spiel when you get on the elevator someplace and you're either carrying an Urban Polling tote bag or you have an Urban Polling shirt on, and people say, what do you do or who are you? What do you tell them?
Oh, okay, in 2 minutes. Well, generally what I'll say to them is that Urban Polling is based on Nordic Walking, which is a fitness activity that is very popular over in Scandinavia, who have the healthiest people in the world. And basically, your upper body is doing something that looks like cross-country skiing, and your lower body, you're just walking in urban settings. So, sidewalks, roads, parks, trails. I mean, you can use it for a variety of other different ways, but that's usually my elevator pitch on the topic.
And I know we'll get into that in more detail in the second half of the interview. Out of curiosity, just for the listeners, how does this differ from maybe somebody who's a hiker or a trail runner who uses poles on rough terrain?
Oh, yeah. Well, great question. We get asked that a lot. Well, basically, I mean, I'm a big hiker myself. And the difference is that one is the design of the pole, and second of all, it's the technique. So when you're hiking, usually your elbows are bent and you're using it to offload the weight off your hips and knees and to give you a bit more stability. Whereas this activity, your arms are straight, more like cross-country skiing. I'm not sure if all your listeners are familiar with cross-country skiing, and it's more about changing your walking into brisk walking or an athletic walk, where you're using the pole and it's got a ledge that's designed in it that you press down that ledge as you move your arm back, and you work like 75 to 90% of your muscles. So it's all about getting like a high intensity cardio and including resistance training there as well. So just like different benefits, different pulls, and then different technique.
So it's almost like it's the exact opposite. When the trail runners are using it, or the hikers, they're using it, as you said, to offload the body or to offload the work or decrease the work. In the case of urban poling, you're trying to increase the workload or make it more of a workout. Is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great description. However, just to add to the confusion, we developed it in two different ways. Like what we did was we took the generic activity of Nordic walking and we looked at, like I'm as an occupational therapist, I first looked at the research and then I was like, hey, how could we adapt this so that we can actually use this fitness activity for rehabilitation? So in that case, it's more like hiking, balance, posture, offloading. Like here in Canada, for instance, it's like best practices to use it for pre and post hip and knee surgery for those exact reasons. So on the one hand, you would do all those, you would use it for that reason for rehab. But on the other hand, if you wanted to use it for losing weight or, for increasing your intensity of your exercises. So for example, here in Canada, people with diabetes, people recovering from cardiac heart surgery, people who are obese will actually use the urban poling or the fitness technique, whereas Parkinson's, stroke, pre and post hip and knee surgery, other neurological conditions, they will actually use our activator poles, which provides more balance and stability and offloading.
And I think one of the most interesting things with Moving2Live, when I get the opportunity to interview people across the movement spectrum, is to find out their story, first, how they got into their career, and then also, in your case, how you have a career and you developed a company with urban poling. So I'm curious, growing up, were you an active kid, or was this something that the importance of movement arrived later, maybe during schooling?
Well, occupational therapists tend to be more, like the reason I got into this is that we're really obsessed with adapting devices. So whereas more the gait and exercise is related to physiotherapists. So I spent a lot of time talking to physiotherapists and exercise physiologists and fitness instructors on how to use it. I would say the similarity of occupational therapy is more about how I looked at changing the design and the technique. And just, interesting enough, I was always active in terms of doing things on my own. So the reason why this has led into being such a great career for me is that when I was a kid, I did more things like I walked, I biked, I like to hike in the outdoors. I wasn't doing a lot of team sports. And I was never somebody who I felt like I had to really, work strenuously. To me, it was always about the enjoyment of doing it and just, being active. So it, kind of translates well to this. And just interesting enough, I actually was going to be a social worker, and I met a social worker, and she was like, you know what? I think you're more suited to being an occupational therapist. So I was just thinking about her the other day, because it's funny how you have a conversation and it changes your entire life. And I looked into it, and I just loved how it was about fostering independence and function. And that really, got me on the route to being an occupational therapist.
And I think you hit on something, whether you realized or not, with what you said. What you did moving around when you were growing up, you did things that you enjoyed doing. And I know one of the things that often, if you want a lifetime of movement and you want to maintain your independence, if you don't enjoy doing things, you're not
Yeah.
likely to do it. So I think whether it was consciously or unconsciously for yourself personally, it's like at a young age, like I like doing this, I like walking. And I suspect a lot of the difficulty for many people who maybe stop moving, maybe after they graduate from university, or maybe they have some sort of an orthopedic injury or a chronic disease or something, is that they never really enjoyed it, and they never learned or to try something that says, hey, I really enjoy doing this. So I think you found a blessing early on, whether you realized it or not.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, because I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we've got an obesity crisis, is because, I think when you're younger, there's so much emphasis too on team sports or the competitive side. And I agree with you, so that when people leave high school, they don't really have the tools to develop like a lifelong love of fitness. Whereas that's one thing I love about the polls too, is that we have people using the polls, like in Finland, for instance, and in Sweden, they use them in preschool. It was their Olympic summer training program for their cross-country team. Moms use it, and older adults. So it kind of goes through all the spectrum. And that's one thing I think is so neat, is that you can use polls. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your physical level. And the other cool thing is that I really like about them too, is that, so many times I find in rehab, we'll say to people, okay, do these exercises and do these during the rehab. And then, people will do them for a few weeks and then they get bored. But one thing I've noticed about the polls is, we've been doing it for 15 years, is that I'll go into these, different groups of, where they work on specific conditions like stroke or Parkinson's. And I've met people who are still using them, after 12 or 14 years. So it's really the whole mission of our company really fits in well with what I believe about exercise and activity, and what I think therapists should really think about too, is not just what do you do in your rehab period, but how are we going to keep this one person active for the rest of their life?
And I would imagine, even though, as you said, they're designed for urban, they're still used a fair amount in parks, or even just walking on city streets on the sidewalks. There's a lot of benefits, I think, just to being out with fresh air, and also the different visual things. If you happen to walk on down a tree-lined street, you can see how it differs from season to season, and there may be a bird or something that you see. And I would imagine that also helps keep people saying, I want to do this, rather than, oh God, I got to go do my rehab exercises on the floor again. Not that isn't required sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting doing, like, I don't know what it's like in Pittsburgh, but here in Vancouver, what's really cool during this time is that I can't believe how many people are walking. And just like you said, like, they're really noticing, their neighbor's garden. And so, one thing we've been really lucky as a company is that, you can still walk and use our poles during this time. But I agree. I think it's kind of a perfect time that people are slowing down, taking a look around, and smelling the roses, and using their poles. So
I think what you also hit on an interesting point there with they can do this even in this time of COVID-19. I know for my local podcast, FitLab Pittsburgh, we do 3 times a week, 1-minute movement tip and lifestyle hack videos. And one of the videos we made, a few months back, is, at some point we're going to have a new normal where maybe like we have some restrictions here in the United States. I'm not sure what it is in Canada. It literally differs state to state, but like right now in Pennsylvania, we're supposed to wear masks when we're out. But,
right.
One of the things that we encouraged people in Pittsburgh with the ethos is, find something or some things that no matter what happens, you still have control over them with movement. I think that's one of the things that you've hit on with the urban poles, is if you can get outside, you can do this particular workout or activity, whether it is a fitness activity or whether it's just movement because it makes you feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. the other thing too is that even, without these times, I found a lot of people don't like to go to the gym, and then it's a lot of work to get ready and you got to drive down there. So, just being able to recognize that, we can be active just walking out the door. And it was my Swedish neighbor that actually introduced me to the generic name of this, Nordic Walking. And, the Swedes are the healthiest people on the planet. So I think whenever we need to, have advice about being healthy, the Swedes are always a great resource.
Absolutely. I'm curious. I mean, you gave a great description on how you, I guess you could accurately say, fell into getting into occupational therapy, just a conversation with a social worker. How did you come up with the idea of saying, I'm really going to develop a company that makes walking poles, and I'm going to develop education to teach people these aren't just for walking. You can use them as a rehab. You can use them as a lifestyle change.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just started, I was doing my master's degree for gerontology. And I was like, what is the healthy aging trends that are out there? And then when my neighbor introduced me, I asked her, I said, what are you guys doing in Sweden? So she said, well, we just walk. And that just actually blew me away, first of all, because I was like, wow, when you think about all the things we do, and the Swedes and the Finns are just walking, to stay healthy. And then she said, oh, but everyone uses poles. And it's called Nordic Walking. Well, I had never heard of that concept before. I was like, what? You guys use walking poles? Like as if you're skiing on the sidewalks? And when I looked at the research, like there is actually 300 independent peer-reviewed studies on PubMed right now on Nordic Walking. I was absolutely blown away because I was like, oh my goodness, these hit all the goals we're trying to achieve in rehabilitation. And it's such a simple concept. It has so many benefits. Like even after 15 years, I just can't get over how much new research is coming out and how much sense it makes for rehabilitation, because when you're using the poles, you're actually mimicking a normal walking pattern. And when you look at so many conditions like Parkinson's and stroke and MS and, even your pre and post hip and knee pain, all of that changes the way that we walk. And so, as soon as you change the way you walk and you change your posture, then you're going to have more pain, you're going to have muscle imbalances, you're going to have an increased frequency of falls, you're going to reduce your balance. So it's funny, I just come to realize like how many things come back to maintaining that normal functional gait pattern. And so, besides all the other benefits that are associated with it too. So then when I looked at it, I thought, well, why wouldn't I try to adapt this for rehabilitation? Because the actual design, like I'll just give you a couple examples. One of them is that, most of them come with a turn lock system or a flip lock. Well, that's quite challenging for people who are older or have neurological conditions to have that adequate grip strength. So we changed it into a button lock system. And then here in Canada, we've actually been able to change it so that people are actually using our activator poles instead of canes, and to reduce or delay the use of crutches and walkers when appropriate and when assessed by, obviously a qualified rehab or fitness professional. And so then I looked at, how do you, just change it to the weight bearing capacity on these poles is going to be strong enough that you can use it instead of these other devices. And then most poles come with straps. And if you look at the research, a lot of reasons why people injure themselves with poles is actually the strap itself. So then we developed it. It's got an ergonomic handle with a really wide ledge on it instead of a strap. And it's that ledge that you can use on the handle to push down on it for engaging the core, for offloading, for balance. So it really yeah, sort of. And then initially I was thinking, oh, I'm going to bring it to the therapist and they're going to love this and we're going to convert everyone. Well, that practice actually took a long time because therapists, I can say this because I am one, were really slow to change compared to fitness trainers. So to be honest, when we started this company, the way that we stayed afloat was that we had a lot more interest from the fitness industry, from fitness instructors, and actually even therapists wanted to just use it for themselves instead of for clients. And they want to use it to manage their, waist circumference and increase their cardio. So that's kind of how we got in both industries.
I think it's interesting. You took the question away from me when you said it was potentially the use in rehab to delay the use of crutches or maybe instead of canes. I'm curious, with your patients that you've worked with, what is their initial impetus and has it changed over time when you say, instead of this cane, why don't we try these poles? And I'm looking at your website and I see you have different colors and different designs. So I would imagine some people would say, that's great, and other people wouldn't. Could you maybe share what the perception was of patients when you introduced them to this?
Yeah, it was I think it's a little bit easier here in Canada, although 15 years ago, people were like, what? That's interesting. But we do use poles a lot here in Canada, so they have seen them a lot, and they've seen them a lot for hiking, snowshoeing, skiing, cross country. So in some ways, people were like, oh, wow, you want me to exercise and you don't see me as declining and being, that negative perceptions of disability. So some of them really liked it and were really keen to try it because they felt there would be less stigma to use poles compared to using a walker. And of course, definitely compared to using, definitely compared to using a walker and a cane. And then other people, it was more challenging. They didn't want to be, I think they didn't want to be the focus of attention when they were walking the community. So they would only do it if I suggested a group or doing it with their spouse. So it definitely has changed over time. I would say now it's quite mainstream here, but that is definitely, we're just starting in the US, and I find the places where poles are used more consistently, it's probably going to be an easier integration into rehab and fitness.
That's interesting you say that. I know here in the Pittsburgh area, I do a little personal training on the side. And a few years ago, I had a client who's long-term, for a long period of time, 30 plus years, she had rheumatoid arthritis and really went out of her way to stay active. But she was going to New Zealand and Australia with her husband and some friends, and she was worried about some of the hikes. She's able to walk, but she was a little concerned because they were going off road. And I gave her a pair of hiking poles and said, just try this, Yeah. And I still remember getting a text message from her of a selfie of her on a cliff, on a trail overlooking the ocean. It's like, and she'd never heard of them before. Right. And I've encouraged her to, put them in your car. And if you're someplace where you think you feel a little bit less secure, use them, because that's much better than taking a fall. And I think the fact that you're introducing to something that's specifically designed, is very beneficial. I'm curious, when you were in your gerontology degree program and you talked to your Swedish neighbor and you said, "Ooh, I want to do this." How did that transition to saying, "Hey, this is an idea for a company," versus, "Hey, this is something I'm going to use in my practice with my patients"?
Oh, I mean, I am kind of an entrepreneur at heart, and to be honest, I had this conversation with my Swedish neighbor, and we literally decided at the end of the hour that we were going to start a company. Because I just got so excited when she was talking to me about it. I'm like, what? Initially I was very, I don't understand. And then, kept talking, and I said, and it just, by the end of the conversation, I remember too, she also said, I was thinking I should bring this to Canada. And then I had said to her, I want to do it with you. Like, I have so many ideas of, so it kind of, I have to say, most of the decisions I've made in my life are definitely someone will say something to me and it just rings true for me. And then I just know it's something I have to follow because it kind of, instinctively or it just fits in with other values or ideas that I have. And I have to say, like, most of the times I've just followed that. And in this particular case, here I am 15 years later, and I still get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
I'm curious, as somebody who founded the company and has it, I always ask people who have a business where they have something, or if they're bicycle racers, how many pairs of poles do you actually own for your own personal use?
Right. Well, I always have, my car is full of poles and our storage closet is. What was really neat about the poles too, when you say that, is like there's, having your own business is challenging. Everyone talks about how exciting it is, and absolutely, but it's incredibly challenging. And what's been really interesting throughout this 15 years is that whenever I have a low period where, we're dealing with so many different things, something will happen where I will get a greater appreciation of the poles. I'll just give you an example. I was working as a therapist, and then when I started working this company, because I was at my desk so much, I started to get I actually got a frozen shoulder because I was spending such long hours trying to get the company up and going, and then I started using the pole. Like, I was like, hey, why wouldn't I do shoulder exercise? Because I could barely move my arms. So I used the end of the pole to push my hand into different ranges. And then I was like, why wouldn't I, just walk with the poles to move, exercise my shoulder joint? And then I realized, hey, in a kilometer, I was actually moving my arm 500 times. Like, what other exercise in a kilometer or in 10 minutes, could I be moving my arm 500 times? So, and then, when I got into, my 50s, where I was getting more irritable, because of menopause, and then I started using my poles more just to, get outside and just reduce my stress. And so I just find throughout the whole thing that I keep coming back to it. And then, my husband is a biologist, and he really got me into backcountry hiking. And then we were like, just like you and your friend in New Zealand, we're like, oh my gosh, hiking with poles makes such a difference. So it just, even for myself, I have to say, I keep rolling back into, using the poles. And I'm not actually, you're right, I'm obsessed with them.
But it makes sense. If you're going to have a business, you better be obsessed. I'm reminded of taking how to use an espresso machine at a coffee shop, and It was me and another espresso nerd, and a lady who was there. She said, "I want to open a coffee shop, but I don't really like coffee," which I never really understood. I don't know if the coffee shop ever came to fruition, but if you don't like to walk with poles and exercise with poles, I think it would be difficult to have a successful company and a successful business where you're educating other people on the use of poles.
Mm-hmm. I think that is what makes it fun, when you can speak authentically about something. And and that's really what I think keeps you going when you have your own company, because, it's a challenging environment. Particularly ours is, a combination of, we do training, which is really fun, and retailing. But I think, for all retailers right now, it's a challenging time. And I think what keeps you often going is, your passion, your enthusiasm, and your interest.
And let's delve into that a little bit. I know, as I said in the intro, I first became aware of urban polling by seeing a post that you made that was reposted by Fred Go of PT Helper, and you had a virtual conference. When you started the company, were you starting it to educate people on polls, or were you starting it to sell polls to people, or a combination? How did you get into the education aspect?
Well, we kind of really fell into that because initially I was thinking, oh, this would be so easy for people to understand how to use it for rehabilitation and for fitness. And what I found was people kept asking us, no, I want you to, come back and teach me how to use this. And then I would for an hour, and then they'd say, no, I need more instruction. So I just, I realized that people weren't going to use it unless we trained them really well and they felt confident. So that's really how it got started. And then we realized, we're a small company. How do we, cover this massive area? So we went online. And then with COVID, we decided, let's just try a live virtual conference. So it's really been about changing with the times as well. Like, actually, what's interesting too is that when we first started, I also gave a lot of webinars to therapists, and that was quite a new concept when we first started. I mean, we really did it because it was economical and it was easy. But really, it actually, I think, introduced a lot of therapists to a new way of learning as well, because not a lot of people, when we started off, were doing it that way. So, I think we've just been lucky, and we've kind of just tried to change along with the times too.
And I know, just looking at when your company was founded in the early 2000s, the changes in the speed of the internet and the access to the internet has really made it much easier to have webinars and much easier to have live conferences. Yeah,
absolutely. And now we've been lucky that we've been able to expand into Ireland and the UK and Australia. So, that, online and virtual system has helped even more. I mean, it just wouldn't be possible for us to continue on with, doing live training in those areas. So,
and I know I've had the good fortune of being able to look at your website and have you fill out a brief questionnaire, but could you talk a little bit about the different types of education you have? Because you've kind of touched on the fact that with the urban poles, you first made your inroads into the fitness community, and now you're also making more inroads into the rehab, and how it's good literally both across the aging spectrum and across the health and wellness spectrum. So what types of education can people get, or what types of education have you put together?
Well, what we've done is we've tried to do a lot of single webinars on specific conditions. So if you go to our website, you'll see it on everything from, traumatic spinal injuries, spinal stenosis, sports injuries, pre and post hip and knee surgery, and then, all the neurological conditions like Parkinson's, stroke, acquired brain injury. So we've done 1 hour that a lot of those are free on our website. We've got international recognized, physio and fitness instructors who are guest speakers on those. And then we've got a half-day course where you can really delve into a lot of those conditions and learn the different techniques. And also, when we first started using it, therapists were primarily using it to really fix people's walking patterns, but I would say now we use it just as much for seated and standing exercises. So, hence why we were working with PT Helper with Fred. He took a lot of our exercises and, inserted them into PT Helper. And then on the fitness side, we have same thing. We have individual ones on how to increase, intensity and use it for wellness or for seniors and schools and different avenues. And then we've got the half-day course for fitness instructors to learn how to do more of a vigorous fitness component of it, and also to do the seated and standing exercise. But obviously they're at a higher intensity. So I would say that's basically our training programs in a nutshell.
And for people who are listening, is it possible to do all of these programs online, or some of them only face-to-face?
No, all of them we've actually got online right now.
Awesome. Again, I've got the advantage of being able to look at the web page, and I think you did a great job of explaining how you changed the handle on the poles when you were mentioning many of the injuries are caused by straps that traditional poles have. My immediate thought was skier's thumb. I'm curious, what are some of the people who are not familiar with poles, or they go to their local big box sporting goods store, and there's the $20.95 version, and they're saying, well, why don't I want these? Why do I want to spend,
Yeah.
5 times that much, or in some cases, a little bit more than that?
Well, interesting, Ben. Gosh, I love your questions. Like in this largest scale study, what they found was the most common injury was a skier thumb injury. So thank you for mentioning that. Well, and I would start with there. So I just want to say there are other good quality poles, but I always cringe when I hear people say, go to Costco or go to Walmart and just get a cheap pair. It's like, oh no, like you wouldn't get a cheap pair of, running shoes to prevent injuries. So you shouldn't get, you should get a good pair of poles. So I would say the main difference is we don't have the strap. We've got an ergonomic handle, so to prevent, injuries of the wrist. And there are 3 anti-vibration features because this is a repetitive task. There's a lot of vibration when your pole hits the ground. So we try to reduce that amount of stress on your joints. And then going back to the button lock system, it bears, 200 pounds. So if you're using this instead of canes, crutches, or to reduce the use of walkers, you can put a lot of weight on each pole and it's not going to slide. So some of the cheap poles can be as low as, you put 20 to 40 pounds of direct pressure on it and the pole will slide. So that is certainly unsafe for our rehab clients. And I would say people, we developed our poles to last. I'm not really into the kind of throwaway culture that, we have with a lot of with a lot of products. We developed it so that you can have the poles. They're going to last a long time. You do have to replace the tips because they will wear down. They're made 100% of rubber, but absolutely the grip will start to wear down. So that's about the only thing you do need to change. The other thing too is we did change the base of the pole is different. So for rehabilitation, it's more like a bell-shaped tip that creates more stability and it forces the pole into an upright position. So if you can kind of think of it, what the research shows is that when a pole is vertical, you get more balance and offloading, and that bell-shaped tip forces in that position. If you want your pole to really push you forward and create a lot of create a good cardiovascular workout, you want your pole to be diagonal, and it's a boot-shaped tip that generally comes with a Nordic Walking pole. That you can still get those from our poles as well, but there's just you can choose between which pole would be best for you. So yeah, I would say in terms of having a quiet, high quality, a good weight bearing pole and a handle that really helps to develop your ability to do that core strengthening, offloading balance. Our core grip will assist you with that.
And I can see from looking at your website that if you purchase a pair of poles and at a later date, you mentioned you have to replace the tips because they wear, but you could potentially start out if you were in a rehab setting with the bell-shaped tips and later go more to the urban boot tip as you progressed.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that point. We have so many people who will start off, particularly, for example, take post-hip and knee surgery. They'll start off, using our activator poles and the bell-shaped tip. But, after 3 months, you should be able to, walk without any devices. But what they'll do is they'll just use it for exercise. They'll change it to the boot-shaped tip, and they'll use it for the polling, or, they can use it for hiking. So, yeah. And then the other thing, too, is we tried to keep our pricing, in the middle. So we tried to keep it high quality, but we tried to keep it in the middle. So, the poles range anywhere from, like you mentioned, anywhere from $20 to, $250. So we've tried to stay more in the middle. And then also if someone is a fitness instructor, if they are a exercise physiologist or a therapist, we do offer professional pricing so that they can bring it into their clinic or provide it, try it out, use it for their services or for their clients. And that's anywhere from about 25 to 35% off that they can get.
I'm curious, thinking of it from the fitness point. I know you mentioned that the fitness people were the first people to kind of jump on board when you started urban polling. And kind of one of the jokes among people in the fitness industry is, squirrel. They see something and they see a squirrel and they jump from one thing to another. The interesting thing to always do every January or February, the American College of Sports Medicine comes out with the top 20 fitness trends of whatever the year is. And if you go back 5 or 10 years, it's interesting to see the things. I'm curious, with the fitness people being the earliest adopters, how you've seen more recently when different group classes and people are looking for different things, how you've seen the fitness people continue to grow or whether it's fairly stagnant.
Yeah, we've been lucky. We've have a lot of our original fitness instructors still with us. I think because it's pretty versatile, you can use it for, so many, the polls just don't have to be for urban polling. You can be for so many other activities. So it's allowed them to not be stagnant with the polls. And then now we've, for example, just a couple weeks ago, one of our fitness instructors started doing virtual fitness classes with people using polls in their house. And so they can do high intensities, standing exercise with the poles. And so it continues to change. So I think overall, the difference is absolutely that we've got, I think fitness trainers are more into trends, but overall, I have to say we've kept most of them. They've seen that it can be used in a diverse kind of way. A lot of fitness trainers also, I find, are doing more rehab-related conditions as well. So we've got this aging population. So maybe before they were always looking for the high-intensity boot camp, but I think they're realizing a lot of their clients are getting older and getting aches and pains. And so this fits well with them. Yeah. And then I would say therapists are the opposite. They start off really slow, and then it's actually really hard to get them off a trend. So, interesting enough, I've never looked at it as a trend. I've always felt like this did have a place as a lifelong activity. So sorry, I used the word trend myself, but I have to say I was never really interested in bringing a trend that would come in and out. It was always about, bringing something in that would just keep growing and being sustainable for a long time.
I don't mean this in a negative way. I'm reminded when you said this that very often the longest lasting things in the fitness field are the things that are basic, and walking is pretty basic, and you've put your own spin on it. I'm reminded. Yeah. I interviewed a good friend of mine who has a bike fit business, and I remember in 1996 when I met him at Auburn University, and they were teaching spin classes at one of the facilities, and his comment was, "Why is this new? I did this at the Olympic Training Center in the early 1980s." And I just interviewed him a few weeks ago, and we laughed about it because depending on the part of the country or the part of the world you're in, spinning is the latest, newest, and hottest thing. And now it's 40-some years old or more. So I think you could say walking is the same. All of a sudden, people are realizing, oh, wait, I don't need that big fancy treadmill. I can actually go out and walk on my own sidewalk or in my own park. Shocking or amazing.
Absolutely. I know it's funny too, even about biking, like, what's old comes new again. Like what I've noticed during this COVID too, even about biking is we cannot believe how many people are out biking and using it to get to work. What a novel idea.
Except in Scandinavia and other countries like that.
Exactly.
We've had the good fortune, and I apologize if I butcher your name, to talk to Mandy Shintani. She is the founder of Urban Polling. We will almost certainly have this on both our Moving to Live and Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcasts, because I think what's old is new, and I think anything that encourages people to get outside and move is that. Mandy, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to Moving to Live. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to learning more about urban polling.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And Yeah, just thank you so much for including me.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving to Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about all the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving to Live on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play, and be notified about new episode releases. Have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com. Connect with us on Twitter or Instagram, both _MOV2LIV. Please tell your friends about Moving to Live. It's a go-to place for information for movement and exercise professionals and amateur aficionados who understand that movement is part of what makes your life complete. Until next week, keep on moving.